En el centro de la pampa vive un pimiento, sol y viento pa' su vida, sol y viento, sol y viento pa' su vida, sol y viento.
Hello, I am Patrick Barnard. Welcome to the 89th edition of the Pimento Report. It is Friday, February 20th, 2015, a cold day in Montreal. And it's an important day for the people of Greece, for the government in Athens, and perhaps even for Europe as a whole. The title of this Pimento Report, simply one name, Syriza.
Thousands in Athens celebrated the victory of Greece's left-wing and anti-austerity Syriza party in a snap election. Its leader, Alexis Tsipras, comes to power on a promise to renegotiate the country's huge debt. That resonated with voters, weary of budget cuts, tax hikes and high unemployment.
On February 20th, 2015, Friday, an agreement with his European counterparts was reached in Brussels by the Greek finance minister, Mr. Yanis Varoufakis. Varoufakis is an economist, most recently at the University of Texas. He's written extensively about the problem of recycling huge cash surpluses in a global economy, surpluses of exactly the kind that are now being produced by Germany. And Varoufakis has stressed how imbalance of surplus and deficit produces an eternal contest between surplus and deficit countries. In the last week, people all over the world have watched with fascination as Varoufakis has sought to educate the Germans and the European elite about how austerity is self-destructive for surplus and deficit countries alike.
There were difficult meetings, but in the end, we have shown that negotiation means both compromise and a readiness to imagine that you may have to say no to proposals, to suggestions, to offers that you don't have a moral right, a political right, a mandate to say yes to.
The economics editor of the BBC, Robert Peston, commented ironically on the agreement of Friday, February 20th, saying that it was going to give Greece about 2 days of relief. But he also stressed that Varoufakis genuinely believes that he's released Greece from the shackles of austerity.
We averted the view that a country that is heavily indebted and in a program cannot possibly claim that elections can change something. We stood upright from the beginning of the negotiations to the very end, especially when faced by immense pressure.
The Pimento Report was lucky on this past Friday. We met Natassa Romanou. She is a distinguished environmentalist and professor at Columbia University. She's also a member of Syriza New York. And the Pimento was able to be with her when this agreement was reached in Brussels. And we also watched as she talked to young environmentalists here. So let's listen to this person we were privileged to meet as she describes what she does to young environmental activists in Montreal.
Professor at Columbia University at the Department of Applied Mathematics and Applied Physics and the Joint Institute of Goddard Institute for Space Studies, which is a NASA institute at Columbia doing studies of climate. So we are responsible for one of the US 3 major climate models. We are looking at the carbon cycle effects, the changes due to anthropogenic activities. And I am particularly interested in effects in the ocean. But then also I'm a political activist as well. We have developed in New York the Syriza, a contingent of Syriza, the Syriza New York. And we bring members of Syriza in the US. We try to promote the positions that Syriza has on economic and social issues. And we also do activist work in environmental issues.
Της Ελλάδας από το ευρώ, αν και το δημοσίευμα χαρακτηρίζεται ως ανόητο από κοινοτικές πηγές.
Αθήνα και Ευρωπαίοι εταίροι διαπραγματεύονται για τη νέα οικονομική βοήθεια. Παρασκηνιακά παίζουν ήδη εναλλακτικές. Η Ευρωπαϊκή Κεντρική Τράπεζα προετοιμάζει την έξοδο της Ελλάδας από το ευρώ.
Και ενώ στο τηλεοπτικό δίκτυο Euronews επισημαίνεται η άγνοια.
Natassa, Romanou, you have just been watching this announcement. It is February 20th in the afternoon in North America, in the evening in Brussels. There appears to be an agreement between the Greek government and the European Commission, European finance ministers. What's your impression of what has been agreed today?
We don't have the full details of the agreement yet. We don't know whether it is an agreement or some parts of it need to be decided yet. It seems that it's a very positive view that both sides have given up some ground and have come to a common decision. For me, the best thing, the best clause that I heard is that the government doesn't need to take any more measures that are combined to the bailout package. I think that unties the hands of the government to implement its Thessaloniki program, which they were elected for by the Greek people, which the Greek people desperately need to start getting out of the crisis. And I think it's very positive.
The Thessalonica program that you described will give relief to the people who have suffered so dreadfully for the last 6 years. Is it your understanding that this agreement today will not compromise the basic program of the government now in Greece?
We have to see what has been decided upon. But the fact that we are not going to take any more measures along the lines that Troika had announced earlier, which would be more layoffs and more taxation, I think this is very positive. There were no other requirements from the government other than what the government has already committed to, right? For example, resolving the taxation issue in Greece, becoming more fair and equitable, cutting down corruption, attacking corruption, and so forth. I think these are measures that the government itself wants to do. They are not imposed by Troika. And they will start giving relief to the population.
Now, I heard you today speaking to young people here in Montreal, and you said, if I remember correctly, that you are hoping that Southern Europe, Greece, Italy perhaps, certainly people in Spain, will be forging a new vision, a new idea of Europe. Is that your feeling, and is that the feeling of the government in Athens today?
Certainly the feeling of the people, and that's what is important, the people in Southern Europe, and my personal feeling as well, is that the way that European Union operates right now, its institutional laws and some of and the imposition of measures to the people and the directives that it gives out to the peoples of Europe are not equitable and are not they don't align with the spirit of the European Union, the reasons that it was formed, and so they have to be revised. And as the popular movements across Europe are taking power, this is now within sight.
And do you think that new view of Europe is truly there in the south and perhaps will move northwards?
It is definitely in the view of the people in Spain and in Greece and in Italy, because they have been suffering under the austerity measures. And so they understand that austerity has been imposed from the bureaucrats and the technocrats in the European Union. And I think that realization will emancipate also the people in Central and Northern Europe who may have not yet experienced austerity to the degree that the Southern Europeans have, but they are definitely the victims further down the road.
For those of us who are observers looking on, what is so striking about the new government in Athens, and again, if this is a true step forward today, then it's even more striking, and that is that this is a government that has actually stood up against this very gray, ugly, and ultimately self-defeating consensus. So this is extremely impressive to a lot of people around the world, I would say.
I think I agree with you, and that is why what has mobilized people across the Atlantic Ocean in Northern and South America as well, to watch very closely, even non-Greek people, to watch very closely the developments in Europe, because they can see the correlation, they can see the analogies with their own state of affairs in their own countries, with austerity being imposed now worldwide, and the fight that they have to put up and eventually win.
Now it's Sunday, February 22nd, 2015. The events of the weekend are taking place, and the contest that is transpiring over the Greek debt is national, regional, and global. Syriza is a coalition in Greece. There are tensions within that coalition over these negotiations. The Greek government will go after tax evaders, it is said, fight bureaucratic corruption, but it will not compromise, it assures people. It will not compromise on its commitment to a new deal for the Greek people. Upcoming negotiations in these days that follow are going to be really tough. Here is the BBC News broadcast of Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras talking to the Greek population yesterday. That's Saturday, February 21st, 2015, and he warned them that these days ahead are going to be difficult.
Χθες κερδίσαμε μια μάχη, όχι όμως και τον πόλεμο.
Yesterday we won a battle, but not the war. The difficulties, the real difficulties, not only those related to the negotiation and our relationship with our partners, are ahead. Yesterday we took a decisive step, leaving austerity, the bailout deal and the Troika behind us. A decisive step to change direction within the Eurozone.
Η διαπραγμάτευση όμως δεν τελείωσε χθες.
The negotiation is now entering a new, more substantive stage.
Πιο ουσιαστικό στάδιο
until a final agreement to transition from the bailout deal of disaster.
The debt issue was a pretext, essentially, of imposing austerity to the European countries, to restricting labor laws, to cutting down public spending. It was an excuse to build up all these revenues and bring them back in private hands rather than back into the state. That has caused a humanitarian crisis in Greece, and in many other, it threatens to cause a humanitarian crisis in other countries as well. People have lost their jobs, their homes, they can't pay their electricity. People are now below poverty line, homicide, suicides, and homelessness. So these are facts which everyday people can see all around them, and what it was missing up until Syriza came into power, into the political arena, was the actual connection between the cause and the effect. The cause being the fact that the European Union wanted to implement these measures, and the effect was, of course, putting these measures and people suffering from that effect.
Is it possible that we have some movement now because Varoufakis knows the state of some of the banks in Europe, shall we say German banks, and he knows that the crisis is not what people have pretended it is, that it's deeply systemic, and hence, because he's said this so openly, he has in fact provoked some response from people who normally would not respond in this way?
I think that has definitely happened within Greece itself. Many people, even from the conservative part of the spectrum, have recognized what the core of the problem is, and along the lines what Varoufakis had explained. The real reasons behind the austerity and the measures that governments impose are in fact measures to show the political and economic elites. They are measures to save banks. They are measures to save the oligarchs, and definitely not the people.
Martin Wolf of the Financial Times has written frequently in the last few years about Germany's problem. Germany's problem is that it has a huge surplus. If you have a huge surplus and yet you have a huge amount of capital. Someone else doesn't have capital, and someone else has a deficit. Do you think the Germans are beginning to realize that they have to change?
It's very hard to change your game when you are on top of it, of course. But the truth of the matter is that the understanding now is that the surpluses that Germany has accumulated over the years of the crisis are essentially the debts that the peripheral countries are paying to Germany. And this is very important if we want to move towards the direction of a unified Europe, to understand that these kinds of distinctions of two-tier economies developing in the continent, they have to be stopped, they have to be under control, they have to be checked. And that is why Syriza, Podemos and the other forces in Southern Europe are saying that we need to change Europe itself if we want to have a unified Europe. We have to change the institutions to take into account these kinds of contradictions and try to eliminate them.
So is the word for today Kala?
Kala, yes, it's very Kala. Thank you.
En el centro de la pampa vive un pimiento, sol y viento pa' su vida, sol y viento, sol y viento pa' su vida.